Velkommen til vores næst sidste film på årets Blodig weekend. Fantastisk tidspunkt, også lidt trist tidspunkt, fordi det snart er slut. Fantastisk, fordi det har været fantastisk. Det har været fantastisk at se jer alle sammen. For dem, de få, der måske endnu ikke ved det, så har vi en ny afslutningsfilm. Det her skulle have været vores afslutningsfilm, men i onsdags, da vi havde vores åbningsfilm, havde vi lidt tekniske problemer, så det blev udskudt, hvilket vil sige, at vores afslutningsfilm i dag var vores åbningsfilm. Det er den danske zombiefilm Sorgenfri, som først er premiere til marts næste år. Så vi viser simultant både her i Asta og ovenpå i Karl. Der er stadig billetter, hvis I har lyst til at se et dansk bud på zombie-genren. Lidt zombieagtigt bliver det også nu, fordi at det er en stor fornøjelse at vise en super klassiker fra 80'erne på original 35 mm print, nemlig Re-animator. Og ikke nok med det, så har vi også besøg af filmens producent og instruktør af opfølgerne, Mr. Brian Yuzna. Thank you. Brian, we're going to do a thorough Q&A after the movie.
Good.
So those of you who have questions, we're going to take them after the movie. When we did Society, the screening yesterday, we asked a question to the audience that I want to ask again today because the answer was quite surprising. How many of you are going to watch this movie for the first time? Raise your hands. Okay, still a few. That's good.
Still more than you would expect.
Yeah, exactly. It's cool. So you're going to experience this movie for the first time in the best way possible on 35mm film with Brian in attendance. And all the questions you may have will be answered afterwards. Brian, before we start, a few quick words. This is an H.P. Lovecraft adaptation. And you've worked with Lovecraft quite a bit. For those who know Lovecraft, is this a typical Lovecraft thing, or...?
No, of course not. This is the Lovecraft stories that he would have been slightly ashamed of. They're not typical Lovecraft. This is more like a monkey's paw type of story. But it's a really good movie. And this is a 35. This print was one of the release prints. So this is the print that went to movie theaters. I hope it's in good condition.
Me too.
So it's not real common to see that. And of course, for obviously, it's become a really important horror movie, and it's a good one. So I'm glad to see that those of you that have seen it before are still wishing to see it again. And I hope that continues.
It definitely will. Brian, we're going to talk way more after the movie, so thank you so much for coming.
Okay, enjoy. Thank you.
Please welcome Mr. Brian Yuzna.
Thank you.
How many of you was it that was watching this movie for the first time? Cool. You've just watched a real 80s classic. Brian, when you did this movie, because when you look at your filmography, something that really stands out are a lot of the Lovecraft adaptations, which this is also one of. But you told me when you actually made this movie, you didn't really know about Lovecraft as such. Can you tell me about it?
Well, I tried reading him when I was a teenager, and it didn't quite work for me. Neither did Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, although Dracula by Bram Stoker worked pretty well. And it wasn't until Stuart Gordon, when I met Stuart, he had the idea to do Re-animator, and he already had a 50-page TV script that he had written with Dennis Paoli and Bill Norris. And I was on board. I said I would do it if we could make a feature. I wanted to make a feature film, not a TV. And we added the character of Dr. Hill.
Yeah.
So the original version didn't have Dr. Hill, and it ended when Dean Halsey died, which here you see is sort of the halfway point of the movie. But the Re-animator, after I made Re-animator, of course, while I was once Stuart showed me the idea, I, of course, read Re-animator, the 6 stories or 5 stories. And it really isn't a very typical Lovecraft story. He's famous for his cosmic horror, and Re-animator it's kind of like a monkey's paw type of story. It's one of those grisly kind of people crawling out of the grave type stories. And it just happens to have a mad doctor in it. But after that, then of course we were going to make another Lovecraft movie. So I just started reading all the Lovecraft, and then I became quite fascinated by him. But before making Re-animator, no.
No. And and you directed the sequels to Re-animator. And something we need to touch down upon is the fact that you are actually in one way working on a reboot, remake, TV series version of Re-animator.
All of the above.
All of the above. How far are you in that project?
Well, I never quite understood why it was so hard to get financing for another sequel.
No?
Probably because, I think Re-animator and Phantasm are probably the only two, I don't know, maybe Evil Dead, right?
Yeah.
Are the only ones that aren't owned by a company. The sequel rights and the movies aren't owned by a big company, in which case you get Nightmare on Elm Street 10 or Friday the 13th 8 and Howling 26 and Texas Chainsaw, I don't know what. And so these movies tend to get a little bit watered down or get away from what we loved about them in the first place. With Re-animator, in making sequels, there's only been two, and I was very concerned that they be something a fan would like, because I'm a fan. So I was really worried that they wouldn't be Re-animator enough. And it took a long time. And we did try to do House of Re-animator back some 10, 15 years ago with Stewart directing. Dennis would write it. We'd bring back all the old cast, and it was Re-animator in the White House. And I thought we had the financing, but it fell through. And it was, it was kind of funny because at that time it was really tough, And then when I finished the Fantastic Factory, I went back to LA and I had an idea to do 3 more sequels with Jeffrey Combs. One was House of Re-animator, one was called Re-animator Unbound, and one was called Re-animator Begins. So those were to be the ones that would finish the saga. And I went to Lionsgate, who had the rights to both Bride of Re-animator and Beyond Re-animator. And I said, here, let's do 3 Re-animator movies, and they weren't interested. And it just surprised me. So it's always been kind of, and I never kind of understood why I couldn't get one of these reboots done, remakes, because they do everything. Every movie, all these horror movies are remade. But I think a lot of it is just because I guess I'm not that guy that has the relationships to get it done. It also has to do with who owns the rights. And I have never been willing to, I always want to be, kind of control how it turns out at least. So all of that kind of makes it a little tricky. Now Stuart Gordon did direct a musical version of Re-animator that's been quite successful. And it's a very low budget musical, and it's really great. All singing, no talking, But it really is incredibly fun. It's played LA, Las Vegas, New York, Edinburgh at the Fringe Festival. And of course the problem with theater is that even if you have a successful theater play, you lose money. And that's not much fun. I kind of gave up a little on House of Re-animator, mainly because it was bringing back everybody. It would bring back Stewart, Dennis Paoli, Jeffrey Combs, Bruce Abbott, Barbara Crampton. You have to buy the rights. You have to pay everybody, including me. Everybody wants a lot of money now for it, for good reason. And all of a sudden the budget goes up to a point where it kind of starts being a little difficult. With the second sequel, Beyond Re-animator, all we had was Jeffrey Combs and me. We shot it in Spain, so that was a whole different story. But anyway, I've been trying. Over the years, I've been trying. I've tried to do a reboot. I want to do it. I'd like to make it bigger and better. I've had possibilities, but I never quite believed that the movie would turn out very good, and that kind of bothered me. Right now, I'm trying to do a TV series because that's what everybody's trying to do. That's where the money and the fun is at, and the idea behind a cable series for me would be to tell the movies that we've already made, plus the ones we didn't make, and the stuff in between. There's a lot of stories between the movies, and I think that could make a nice 10 or 12 hour movie to get to the end of the saga before we move into, at the end of Re-animator Unbound, we actually move into the world of She-animator. I won't go into it a lot, but anyway, suffice to say that the end of it all is West and Kane fighting over a syringe as the She-animator calls in the atomic bomb to nuke them. So we see him go down in glory.
I want to see it. I'm on for it. What was the budget for it back then?
Well, it was about a $500,000 or $600,000 movie without the deferments, and then the deferments I think probably brought it up to about $1 million.
Wow. Okay. Was the vision you had for the movie when you went out to make it, and then with the budget you had, was that what also ended up on screen, or was there something you would have liked to add to the movie that never got on screen?
Not really. There was a when we were preparing to shoot it, we shot it between Thanksgiving and Christmas in '84, and I think we shot it in 16 days, and we did cut. I think where the budget hits you is when you don't have so many days to shoot, when you don't have so much time to shoot. And that becomes, that's when the director gets very frustrated because he can't get all the shots he feels like he needs. What we did do in the first shoot is that the prologue before the titles were in Switzerland with Dr. Gruber, that was cut from the script. So we didn't shoot that at first. And we started the movie with Dan Kane bringing back to life, trying to resuscitate a patient. When we finished shooting, Stuart was living in Chicago then, and he stayed around, I think, until New Year's or shortly thereafter, working with the editor, Lee Percy, and kind of got a rough cut, and then worked from Chicago sending VHS tapes back, and got a director's cut. And the director's cut, believe it or not, was over 2 hours long. This is an 86-minute movie. And it kind of was a bit too much. Mm-hmm. I mean, too long, not too much. So then the editor cut it down, got rid of scenes full scenes. It wasn't just tightening up. If you've seen the TV version or the so-called R version, you'll see there's a lot of scenes that we shot that aren't in the movie. They didn't seem to be necessary. He also did a little bit of rearranging the sequence of events in the middle, in the second act, that it was different in the script. He moved some things around to keep the movie going a little bit. When I saw it, there was a couple things. As producer, I thought that it needed something up front. I didn't like that it started with just a guy, a doctor, meeting West, going home, West coming to the apartment, until the cat scene. It's kind of like for me as a horror fan, I'm not knowing what I'm watching. And so I I talked to Stuart and I said, well, I want to make a 3-day shoot for retakes, and I want to shoot that scene, the opening scene, where they come running down the hall and Dr. Gruber's eyes pop out. Because then I thought, well, now you know what kind of movie it is. You see his eyes pop out, and you go, okay, you're going to wait for 10 minutes to see something like that again, but for a horror fan, you're ready to wait. You've had the promise, and you expect it's going to get paid off. And then the other thing was that I wasn't very happy with the cat scene. I really didn't think the effect was good enough. So I wanted to get another makeup artist to make a new cat and shoot the close-ups of the cat again. And then the other part of it was at the end when all the craziness is happening and Dr. Hill's stomach blows up and, you know, all those scenes, I didn't think that they were done. I thought we needed more effect shots. It wasn't working so well. And also we never saw when Wes died. So we see this shot in the smoke when his hand goes down with the syringe. That's the way we show him to die. So anyway, there was a number of things like that we decided to put on the list for shooting. And Stuart at first was not very keen on the idea of shooting the opening again, but I kind of insisted. And so he came back, and so it was, a month or two after we finished shooting, we shot the opening scene, and then we redid all the stuff with Dr. Hill's blowing open. I think even the winding up around West, the intestine, and we also tried to do the cat again. The cat had originally been done by Tony Dublin, and I wasn't very happy with it. And then I asked John Buechler to do it. John Buechler did some of the more special, like the what they call the gunshot to the face zombie. Like some of the key zombies he did, he was really good at that. And so he did the cat again, and it was terrible. So I kept the original. And I think it works fine. I just didn't think so then, So anyway, we did all that stuff and tried to boost the movie a little.
Mm. So what's it like for you as a producer? Because I guess this is your final cut as well.
I think it's mine and Stuart's final cut. It's
Yeah.
my final cut. It's the editor's final cut. This was the movie.
Yeah.
I don't think it was I think everybody agreed this was the movie.
Mm. So what's it like for you when a TV network comes and say, yeah, we want to screen it, but you need to make it like more PG and add all these scenes? Then it becomes a
I thought, great, do it.
Okay.
I mean,
it's
back
a financial
then.
question.
Well, yeah, and also back then, every country used to censor movies. So, Re-animator in England, they cut out the head giving head scene. I don't know. Is that good? I think you're missing something. I think the TV scene takes that out. The TV version does. Mm. In the TV version of Re-animator, the R-rated version, is like 15 minutes longer than the unrated version, or 10 minutes. So they took out the scenes that they thought were too sexy or too violent or something, but they put in all these other scenes, so the movie was actually longer. I think Stuart kind of liked it. He liked seeing those scenes. It's a different version. In Germany, I don't know what they cut out, but I know, for example, with Return to the Living Dead 3, Germany cut out 10 minutes. Well,
That's a lot.
all that stuff was, in Japan back then, any pubic hair was cut out, Every country used to censor the movies. And when you sold the movies, you had to give them the right to do that. That was their option. Otherwise, they couldn't release it. So you already knew that the movie was going to change from country to country. And I guess I just never, I knew the version I wanted. And I didn't give it to the MPAA for censorship because you don't have to. It's always been voluntary. It's just that you don't get a rating. And my feeling was, well, if they're going to cut out all the good stuff, screw them. We'll just put it out unrated.
Yeah.
And that meant we couldn't put artwork in the ads. They all had to be all text. I mean, it definitely hurt the release, but since I didn't have to answer to any financing, I just didn't care. But I knew going internationally, you can't control it. The movies, they become different versions. And now I think with the internet and digital and the censorship's way down, I think that there's this idea that there's a very, there's this artist vision that should never be messed with or something. And maybe that's true in a lot of ways, but even, I mean, on most any movie I've done, it doesn't bother me that much if somebody makes a new version. I think, hey, look, there's a new version. It seems like it's real then, like it's alive or something. And who knows what other people would, how it relates in different cultures or different markets. And it doesn't bother me that there's a version that is a soft version. I don't know. It seems kind of good.
Now it's a beloved cult classic, and I think there are a lot of people in this room who loves this movie a lot. But how was it released back then? You mentioned that it was released unrated, which kind of made it difficult to market. But how was it released in general, or received in general?
Well, it was released by Empire Pictures. I think you saw their logo. I'm not sure if you know about Empire Pictures. It was basically owned by a guy named Charlie Band, who had when I met him when I went out to LA, the guy who introduced me to Stewart also introduced me to Charlie Band's father. And they were shooting a movie. And Charlie made these movies that I really loved what he was doing. He made a movie called Rage War. I think it eventually was called Dungeon Master. Ghoulies. You've probably never seen these movies, but they're worth knowing about. Trancers, which is sort of a pre-Terminator type of movie. And then he ended up making a lot of... Then his company then financed From Beyond and Dolls, which are the second and third movies that I made. And I made them with Stewart. We shot in Italy. So I made Re-animator. I financed it. But by that time, I had already been involved with Charlie Band and Empire, involved in trying to get a movie made through them, but it was one of those typical situations where you go to Hollywood and get ripped off. Very typical story. And I could tell I was never going to get a movie made through him. I was helping him do gap financing at certain times. And Charlie Band is the kind of guy that is just always ahead of the game. He was always ahead of the market, doing the newest thing, the coolest thing. The problem was he was ethically challenged. And so, you didn't really want to give him any money because he'd never give it back, that kind of a thing. So with Re-animator, he owed me money, and I gave it to him to sell. But of course, the money that he sold it for never came back. So the people who had lent me money and invested money, as well as the people who had percentages, thought they were supposed to get rich off the movie, but the money never came to me. So it was a very awkward thing, and I ended up having to sue him and not work with him again. But Stewart did work with him for another 4 or 5 movies. So he did, I think, The Pit and the Pendulum, Robot Jocks, Castle Freak. Trying to think what other ones he did with Charlie in Italy. And then eventually Empire went down and Charlie resurrected Full Moon and did all the Puppet Master movies and that kind of stuff. But when I finished Re-animator, Charlie was just starting to do theatrical releases. So Re-animator wasn't the first. The first was Ghoulies. And they'd had this great, it was kind of like a Gremlins type movie. And they had a great campaign, which was a toilet with a ghoulie popping out of it. And somehow that really caught everybody's attention, and it did pretty good theatrically. And then with Re-animator, we couldn't do any images, but they did. But everybody knew it was a good movie. It was just pretty extreme, and it was at first tested in Philadelphia, and so it was tested there. And I went out there and watched it with different audiences, and then it was released in a very small release in the United States, and I think it maybe took in $1 million, and then it was a big video hit.
Okay, so it really found its life.
But the critics all loved it. So Re-animator pretty much had great critic. It was on best, top 10 of the year lists, not for horror. Pauline Kael liked it. All the big reviewers, all the big newspapers back then, they all kind of liked it. Stewart brought a theatrical. He had been a theater director for 10 years. And I think he brought to the horror movie a real sense of directing actors and making it really work. And I think if Re-animator stands out from any, a lot of people think that it stands out because it's so extreme, and that's true. And it has fun. There's a fun to it. I think we had fun doing it. We thought horror was fun. But I think more than anything what it was you had somebody who had been working in theater for like 10 years, honing his craft, doing these kind of exploitative theater. He was the artistic director of the Organic Theater in Chicago. And so he had been working with actors and telling stories with groups of actors for years and years in front of audiences. And then all of a sudden he gets a movie, and it happens to be a very exploitative, hardcore horror movie. Well, he loves horror. And because I was the final say in it, I was all about going extreme. I thought that's the way we should do it. So he was, as Stewart says, he thinks we bring out the worst in each other. So we got out the worst and had a great time doing it. And I think what it really stands out for is this is like a good movie. It just happens also to be a really hardcore horror movie. And I think we're not really used to that much. I think often when when I watch the movies at festivals and stuff, I always see all what could have been. They sometimes have a really great kind of jumping off point, a great concept, and eventually somehow the scripts don't quite work. They don't really finish it off good, and you don't know really why they're not as satisfying as you thought they were going to be when they started. And a lot of it's the script, it's really the storytelling. Sometimes it's you need the directors, most of them, of the things you see at a festival, they've made 1 or 2 movies, maybe 3. They're not that experienced in telling stories with actors. But if you have somebody from a theater who's done 100 plays, he's really experienced. And I think with Re-animator, what we see is like, wow, that's like a great story. That all works. The actors are all good. And it's really gory and sexy and violent and fun. And wow, what more do you want?
Exactly. We have time definitely for questions.
Yeah.
Son?
One of the famous parts of the movie is the music, and I don't think I ever read a Richard Band interview without at least one Re-animator question. Is it a tribute or a rip-off of a Bernard Herrmann? What were your thoughts about the music back when you were doing it, the movie?
You know, I didn't know it was Bernard Herrmann.
Oh,
I knew that when I wanted a theatrical score, so there was a lot of this music was recorded with the Rome Symphony Orchestra. You know, it was, I wanted a movie that was like a big movie. I didn't want a synth score. Back then they did these kind of real cheap synth scores. If you listen to movies from the 70s and early 80s, if they're not of a certain size, they're done on these, you know, today you can do a score with a computer that sounds like an orchestra. But back then you couldn't. The technology wasn't good enough. And so we put money into doing a real score. Stewart told Dennis that Richard Band, the brother of Charlie Band, of Empire, that he liked Bernard Herrmann. And so he wanted something like Bernard Herrmann. And I remember specifically when Richard Band put a little cassette tape in for me in the parking lot to hear his idea. It sounded okay. I didn't know how that would sound when you got to the whole, you know, as a big movie. And it sounded great. You know, when he did record it and put it in, it sounded absolutely great. Back then, there was, you know, VHS had just begun. So if you were going to see an old movie, you either saw it at a retro house, at an art movie house that's going to show an old John Ford movie or a Truffaut movie or something, or you're going to see it on TV, which is a little square television, mostly in color. And you can't just go watch an old movie. There, on VHS at that time, the big studios didn't have any of their movies. They didn't believe in it. That's why movies like Re-animator and all the 80s horror, the reason it could exist was because at that time the studios didn't believe in video. They thought it was a competition, just like they thought TV was in the 50s, and they didn't want to be involved in it, and they would wait. Eventually, you know, for a long time, they were waiting 2 years, 3 years before a movie could go to video because they wanted it to play out in the theater, then on TV, then on the reruns on TV, and finally video didn't even count. So that meant when you went to a video store, all the movies were these cheap B movies that people were making because the studios wouldn't put the big ones out there. So people didn't get to see the big ones. Today you get day and date. The big movie opens up and it's probably on VOD the same day. So that was a big reason why all these 80s horror movies exist, because you could finance them through VHS until the studios started getting involved. And then in the 90s, they took over and the monopolies happened. And then, of course, all the independent stuff started feeding. Then you had to convince New Line or, you know, one of the big companies to finance your movie. And then, of course, you have the whole system of what's acceptable and going through kind of different layers of development. And I think that takes a little of the, you know, the oddball originality that kind of marks the 80s. So with the fact that Psycho wasn't on VHS meant who knows what the music of Psycho was unless you collect music, and you couldn't collect Psycho music. Today you can find the soundtrack from anything. So the point I'm making is you had to be, only very, very few people would recognize that, and I certainly didn't. And it wasn't until there would be reviewers or somebody complaining about it and saying, well, plagiarist, that then when I listened to it, I said, wow, it's pretty close, you know? But it also reminded me that when Richard Band did it, I think he was used to doing movies for his brother, and these movies didn't really get seen that much. So it doesn't really matter where the music, you know, what your references are, because they're not going to, how many people are going to see it? But to his credit, when Rick Band, when I was doing the credits, he said, listen, I would like to put a credit in the end that says apologies to Bernard Herrmann and who's the other composer? William Goldsmith.
Jerry Goldsmith.
Jerry Goldsmith,
The
yeah.
Piper Stream from The Omen.
You heard it?
Yeah.
Okay. You've read about that.
Yeah.
I think I'm the one that found that one. You're right. So the love theme of Re-animator is from The Omen.
Yes.
It's pretty close.
It is.
But you never had any issues with it at all? Apart
Well,
from saying, I'm
the
sorry?
owners of Bernard Herrmann didn't come after us. So now it's a done deal. Rick Band did say, oh, will you please put this apology? And I said, why would I do that? That sounds stupid. So I didn't do it, and I probably should have. So from that point, and I think when we did the laser disc release, I asked the people doing the extras, please interview Rick Band and let him talk about it, because I think this is the kind of thing you need to talk about. And so you choose for yourself. What is it? Is it an homage, or is it a little less than that, or a little more than that? Because of that, I became very interested in, this is a little bit of a digression, but this issue became interesting to me, and I started thinking, well, how much of that really goes on? And I made a movie called Necronomicon, which one person in the last couple of days actually brought me a DVD cover of. Not a very well-known movie because it's sort of buried. It's not really published many places. But Necronomicon was a trilogy, and one of the two composers on it was Joe DeLuca, who did the music for Evil Dead. And he did the theme song for the wraparound of Necronomicon, which is a trilogy. And normally, all the music I get on movies, I'm always kind of dealing with the composers, because I never liked it enough. I always want it to, I'm always really kind of dealing with them, trying to get it changed, trying to do this. Somehow it never quite satisfies. I mean, Re-animator satisfied me a lot, And another digression, I think the great talent of Rick Band isn't so much inventing a new melody, maybe. His orchestration is very good, and he's what they call a great spotter, which means he knows where the music should start, where it should finish, and what it should be saying. And that's something you don't see very often without it being a big movie. Most, young composers, they don't know how to spot music. They don't know how the music should work. And today the style of music is basically almost sound design. A lot of music in movies today is sound effects. They don't have a theme that tells you the story. It's not in fashion now. Bernard Herrmann did it a lot. I mean, that was his style. And I like that kind of music. I like a music that really tells you, as Rick Band says, the music should tell you how you're supposed to feel about the scene you're watching. So anybody could lift or borrow or be inspired by music from other movies that they're very impressed with. But if you don't know how to use it and how to orchestrate it, who cares? And I think that the work that Rick did on Re-animator goes way beyond worrying, the argument about Bernard Herrmann. But back to the idea of being inspired or lifting music, the theme music of Necronomicon, I can hear it any time I think of it. I can hear that music. I won't sing it to you because it'll be too embarrassing, but it was like, wow, I finally got a score from a composer. It's so good. I love it. It's fantastic. Over the years, I started collecting soundtracks for horror movies because I became very interested in music, and it's really hard to find when I would work on scripts, I wanted to listen to scary music, and you can't find any, believe it or not. It's really, really hard. You always end up going to the 70s giallos. You know, there's these certain Italian music from the 70s that's scary, and very little, or you go to Tubular Bells, or, you know, The Exorcist or something. It's just, it seems like horror movie music is just not scary. And so I would listen to lots, back CDs, I would always buy soundtracks, especially if it was, you know, if it was a famous composer or it was a movie that was a scary movie. And by God, I found the theme to Necronomicon in Dracula's Daughter from the 40s. And then I was looking even deeper into the music thing, and I found that one of Bernard Herrmann's cues from Psycho, I found it in Sunset Boulevard. It's like weird, right?
Yeah.
It's like everything is kind of borrowed from somewhere else.
Thank you. More questions? Yeah.
How did Jeffrey Combs end up playing Herbert West, and was he always intended to play Herbert West?
Well, the way the movie was cast was in a traditional movie, a professional movie way. And it also, of course, is the way Stewart cast for theater. And that is that you called in actors and you had them try out. The casting director is Anthony Barneo. He has a credit. And he was a manager, and he represented Jeffrey Combs. And so Jeffrey was one of the people who came in to read for Herbert West. It was the one role that there was never any discussion about. It's like when Jeffrey did it, okay, this is the guy, and we moved on from there. The backup guy we had, believe it or not, I know the name's escaping me now, but he would have been good too. And he's had a pretty good career. God, I'm trying to remember now. He was in RoboCop. He was in
Peter Weller?
Peter Weller.
No. He's a weird guy. He was in. Huh? Yeah. And he was the backup, and he was really good. So I think if we hadn't met Jeffrey, I think it still would have worked. I think he was good, you know. And as I seen his career, he definitely could have pulled it off. And in the musical, you know, it's a totally new guy. He's kind of a bit more stocky, you know. He does it different from Jeffrey. But you know what? The part's in the script. The actor can do a good job, hopefully, if he's directed well and he has the talent. But actually that character was, all those lines are in the script. That sense of irony that we have with West, that character was written. Stewart gives the credit to Bill Norris, who is the one writer that you never hear about much, because Dennis Paoli is kind of Stewart's collaborator most of the time. But Stewart said Bill was the guy that wrote the West character. So Jeffrey is fantastic, but you know, I think that maybe the movie, you know, had chances even if we had not had the great luck to have Jeffrey.
More questions? Yes, right there.
Just another short question about the music. I'm a huge fan of the Talking Heads, and what's up with the references to...
The references
you mean
to Talking Head?
Talking Heads thing?
Yeah, and there's a poster in the room.
I know, I think it was just, I think that was Stewart said, put the Talking Heads poster, and I think we put it upside down because maybe we thought we didn't have the right to or something. Isn't the poster upside down? I think it is.
Yes, but also she says, you're nothing but a talking head, I think at one point in the movie.
At one time, there was actually a scene that never made it to to be shot, in which after Dr. Hill's head was cut off, he did a class with, he did one of his classes where he's on TV. So it's just his head talking to the students.
More questions? Raise your hand high because it's hard to see. Yes.
Yes, I noticed that likeness delete was used in the background in one of the scenes of the movie. Is that something you saw first in the home course?
What's that?
I'll just give you the microphone.
I noticed Lachmes de Leap was used in the background in one of the scenes of the movie.
Now you have to ask Rick Band about that.
Okay.
But I love that music.
Yes.
And I don't think it has any connection, if you think about the story of that opera, it has no connection to this movie, I think.
More questions? Yes.
Just a quick one.
A quick one. Have you decided or thought about who is going to play parts in TV series already?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
No. Like I said, it's funny, I've always, this movie and, I went along, I didn't know what I was doing when I produced this movie. I think Stuart and I were the only two that didn't have any movie experience on the whole crew or anybody that was dealing with it. And Stuart, at least, was like a real director. He might not direct movies, but he was really a director. And I was just learning by hiring people. And I just went along with what was happening. And the casting, it was all kind of new to me that, the system, I'm sure it's similar here. I know some people, some directors, some movies begin with a cast. They have somebody that they have in mind. But most of the movies I've done, it's been, you get a casting director, you put out what they call, you put it out to the agents. They send you in pictures. You pick certain ones to see. You bring them in and talk to them, and if you can, you have them read a scene. And from there, you decide who to bring back. And if they come back, then they prepare a little more, because now they're a little more excited. And then sometimes if you get somebody like Jeffrey that you're all sure of, then you go, okay, let's try him with Bruce Abbott and Barbara Crampton, and you bring in, and he'll read with different groups, different couples. You want to find a couple that works together, and actually, the Barbara Crampton wasn't chosen first. There was another actress who was given the part of Meg, and then she kind of backed out because of the sexual nature of the role. And Barbara Crampton came in.
Anyone the actress?
I don't remember who it was, and I don't know that she ever had I don't know what she did, but it was wasn't a big deal. It was just, you're involved in it, you think you've got that actress, and then you don't. On Society, the main actress that played Clarissa, I had hired. We were the weekend before I had the actors over to my house for a get together before. It was on the weekend before Monday when we're shooting, and when I talked to her, I could tell that I don't think she's really ready to do the more explicit parts of it. And I actually went to the producer and said, listen, pay her. Let's get that penthouse centerfold here and go with her now.
And we don't mind you did. There's one more question up here.
Oh, that was just about Barbara Crampton, how she, all the nakedness, how she handled it.
It was very difficult for her. She had already done nudity on screen, I think, in that. What was the name of that movie? Blow Up or
Body Double.
Body Double, yeah. So she had already done a little brief nudity there, and she was very, It wasn't that she was, it wasn't that she was like, somebody that it was difficult for her, especially when it got to be like the big scene and stuff, and it was very emotional for her, and I think it was very tough on her, It was all negotiated, huh? I mean, these things, it's not like loose, so we had documents to sign of how much, how many seconds, how many frames, what you got to see. I mean, this is a business, and for an actress, it's a big deal. It's not an art movie. She's not working with, say, doing an art movie, and this is an exploitation movie. It's a horror movie, and I think it's very difficult for actors to do nudity in a movie like that because it is strictly exploitative. It's not very artistic. Of course, the movie ended up being such a critical and popular success that now, of course, it seems like it's quite artistic, and I'm sure it'll be viewed that way as years go by. They'll go, "Oh, that was such a great movie. It was really artistic," but that's not what that wasn't what we were shooting. We were shooting a horror movie. And I know that it was very tough on her, and eventually, but she's a good, she's a trooper, and Stewart's a director that gets the confidence of the actors. They think that they really know that they're working with somebody who knows what he's doing. He's not some amateur or some first timer that you don't know if he's going to be, if you're safe. Acting in according to his direction. It's funny because she also had, it was very specific that, of course, we couldn't do any kind of promotion or any distribution of any images of nudity for any of the actors. I mean, Dan Kane, Bruce Abbott also had the same stuff in his contract. It's not just Barbara. It's every actor that has to do nudity. You have to spell it out because this is the actor has the right not to do it. So you want to make sure that it's very clear what you're expected to do for the movie, and you should agree ahead of time. So Dan had certain, he had to sign. We had to sign things with him about nudity as well. We couldn't do normally you can't do any promotion that way. And for many years, I would get people would want to, I don't know, make photos or do a T-shirt or something that included some nudity with Barbara, and I'd say, no, you can't do it. You have to go talk to her because this is not, we can give you the right for representing the movie, but that's her right. But in the last 10 years, she's cool with it all. And I think what Barbara has found out is that, she went into soap operas. She did a few movies with Stewart. She made kind of a career out of soap operas. And then at one point she married a stockbroker and moved to San Francisco. And I think she lived a very good life. And I've seen her recently. And I think what she found was that all her friends in her society, they were just so fascinated by this bad girl past she had, or this actress past, in this famous, infamous kind of cult movie. And I think she found, hey, that's great. And you get a little older and you go, yeah, I want people to see me naked when I was young. I've always admired the actors who will be naked, who aren't good looking, who aren't beautiful or buff. That to me is really fascinating because I think, wow, that's bravery. But someone who's gorgeous or somebody who's really, some hunk of a guy, what's the big deal about being naked? You look great, And Barbara looked great, She's a beautiful woman. And now I think she just enjoys it. Now you see her in We're Still Here, and she's even producing horror movies, and she's all over. She's really embraced it.
We have time for a few more questions, if you have any. Raise your hands high. Yeah.
Yes, do you know there is a Danish connection in the movie because the guy who filmed the film, he's from Sweden, but he also made films in Denmark.
Yeah, Mac Ahlberg.
Yes, yes.
He actually, I think he actually even directed a few of those famous Danish
Yes, yes. He did.
horror. Porno movies. The Zodiac and stuff like that.
Yeah. But how did he end up in your film?
He had been shooting movies for Charlie Band for Empire, and we actually first hired another director of photography named Bob Ebinger, and Bob Ebinger prepared the movie, and as we were shooting the dailies weren't really being exciting enough looking, and back then, it was film, so you had to send it to the lab and then send it back, then you'd project it, you'd see the lighting, and it wasn't really looking so great, and to a certain degree, it wasn't Bob. Bob said that he was working with Stuart very closely, and Stuart is a director who really knows what he wants. He really. It's not like he's improvising out there. He has a plan, and he does it. And I think part of it, my interpretation was that I just felt like Bob just couldn't really stand up to Stuart for his part of it, that if he needed more time for lighting or if a shot was too complicated. For example, there's a shot in when Dan Kane, I think when he wakes up with the baseball bat, and it didn't really look like night, it was kind of all overlit. And he jumps into the living room, and there's kind of a pan around the room. Now, it didn't go 360 in the edit, but the shot is 360. So Stuart told him that he wants a 360 shot. Well, he says, I can't light that. We don't have the capacity in our schedule to try to make this type of lighting and make it look right. But Stuart just says, do it, that's what I want. So he does it, and then you look at it in dailies and you go, how come this DP is giving us this kind of not so exciting night look? But of course, it's more complicated than that. And so Bob actually shot everything that was in the house, not the basement, but the house. So that was the first stuff we shot in the movie. We started with the house. So all those scenes in the bed, in the house, in the refrigerator upstairs, not the basement, which was a set, but in that house, Bob Ebinger shot that. And he also shot all the scenes in Halsey's house. Those were the two locations. Then when we started, after we shot the opening scene in the hospital, at that point we replaced him, Bob, with Mac Ahlberg, who was somebody that had been working for Empire, and he was an older guy. Older than us, younger than me now probably, right? But he was a generation higher. He had done some work with Bergman. He had worked in Sweden and all over Scandinavia a lot. He had directed. He was a gentleman, and he was a really good DP, and he was fast, and he operated himself. And so when he came in, all of a sudden the whole production really settled down because he was somebody that Stuart would listen to. Stuart was a theater director. He was used to running the whole thing. He's famous for not letting the actors even change a comma in the dialogue. He's very, very strong as a director. And I think with Mac, Stuart also didn't have any experience in film. And I think all of a sudden Mac brought in, he could say, well, Stuart, I think maybe it would be nice if we just moved in on a little close-up here. And Stuart would say yes. And so now all of a sudden we were getting the shots we needed, and he was a very good lighter. I think Re-animator isn't the best example of his work. I think that it looks good, but watch From Beyond, and I think you'll see certainly the best work he did on movies I was involved in. And From Beyond really has a good look.
Definitely. One last question. You up there had one question?
Yes. I saw Re-animator in London 25 years ago, and I was wondering how well did it do compared to the other splatter movies that came out in the 80s, because there were heaps of splatter movies.
I think Re-animator, especially international, it was always big. I mean, big in the sense that the buyers loved it. It was released theatrically. It got great reviews. It won. The first screening of Re-animator was at the Cannes Film Market in 1985. And imagine, we started shooting the movie the last day of November, or at the end of, the beginning of December. We finished shooting it on the 22nd of December, so we had 16 days in there, and then we did a few, so we finished shooting at Christmas, and in May, we showed the movie. And we did reshoots, and it was all on film, so it was a very fast turnaround. The print that we showed at Cannes still wasn't quite finished. It was still an answer print that we brought over to have the screening at Cannes. And at that screening, it was a monster success. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I could believe it because I didn't know any better. I thought, well, it's like when Jorg was saying he showed Necromantic and 500 people show up. He says, oh, that's the movie business. That's what I felt like. We showed it at the Star Theater at midnight, lines around the block. They stomped and cheered at the end of the movie. Roger Ebert was there. I just thought, well, yeah, that's movies. I like it. Never again. All luck.
What did you learn?
And then the French critics gave it the prize for the best film at the market. So all of a sudden it was even. But who knew? I mean, I didn't know anything about it. All I knew was, well, I guess that's the way the movie business is. I don't know.
And I really hope that we are going to see more Re-animator in the future in the form of a TV series or a sequel.
I hope so.
We hope so. We'll keep our fingers crossed. Brian Yuzna, thank you so much
Thank you.
for attending the festival.